This talk is about the promise of smart buildings. When we're sold these buildings, we often hear evangelism about their energy performance and sensing capability, their enhanced occupant experience, and their services tailored to your needs and practices. The problem, as we see it, lies in established approaches to buildings management, and in this work we argue that it's now how we design the management of the smart buildings that needs to get smarter, rather than the spaces themselves or the information infrastructures embedded into them. Through this, we contribute to a growing body of human building interaction or HBI literature examining inhabitants' agency in these environments. So why should the CHI community care about this? Well, in 2016, Alavi et al. Pointed out in their CHI Human Building Interaction workshop that buildings should be designed and nurtured in a dialogue with their users at the individual as well as social levels, and that we as a HCI community are responsible to intervene and involve the user in HBI design practice. This work follows up on this provocation by looking at some of the barriers to user involvement. The practice of buildings management is generally undertaken as part of a top-down service delivery model by professional facilities management teams or outsourced to external companies. We consider that this top-down style of management opens up an interaction gap between building occupants and the spaces they inhabit. Our motivation for this study lies in looking for ways in which occupants, in this case students, might be meaningfully engaged with management in the smart buildings context. This is more important than ever given the increased integration of IoT and sensing in buildings and the impact these have on how we experience them. So in this talk, I'm first going to give an overview of the methods of the study, and then I'll talk about a couple of the findings and discussion points. For more detail on these, please see the published article. This study took place in a newly constructed university smart building. It was finished in 2017 and was less than a year old at the time of this study. Its smart features include a highly granular data collection system and a building management system which adjusts comfort functions such as temperature and lighting accordingly. It's home to a population of staff and students and includes both teaching and learning facilities, computer clusters and office space for desk workers. The university context is a microcosm for facilities management, given the differing power structures and institutional bureaucracies at play, which makes it an interesting context for this study. Students also seem to be overlooked in both the literature and professional assessments of the building's performance. Post-occupancy evaluation is an industry-standard method which collects data on factors such as comfort, as well as positive and negative attitudes towards the building. It's part of an ongoing drive to digitise the design and construction of buildings alongside a range of techniques, including BIM, in proving a building meets its design goals. Such an evaluation was conducted by the building architects through an online survey after the move-in, using the BUS or Building User Studies methodology. Unfortunately, most people who responded to it were staff or postgraduate students. So the big question here is how management of buildings like this might be made more inclusive, especially for the student population. To investigate this, I ran workshops in the building in July 2018, investigating a trio of research questions. These examined firstly students' conceptions of the space, secondly their existing perceptions and expectations of building interaction, and finally how to design interactions which foster both agency and participation. I recruited students to 2 mixed methods workshops by advertising through the departmental mailing list and on the display screens around the building. These were 2.5 hours in length and split into 2 activities. Firstly, a building walk inspired by the City Walks methodology developed in Crivellaro et al.'s paper Contesting the City, and latterly a speculative design exercise using 3 diegetic artifacts, focusing on imagined future smart building technologies. The entire workshop was audio recorded and transcribed, and 2 researchers then thematically analysed the transcripts. We began with an iterative open coding process and indexed into the other mixed media resources as they came up in discussion. The building walk exercise started with a planning phase, similarly to the linked works, where participants came together in groups with the blueprint flipbook of the building plans to discuss and annotate spaces and to plan their route around the building. However, unlike those works, the students undertook the walks in their groups without being accompanied by a researcher. Instead, they carried a voice recorder to record their conversations and a Polaroid instant camera to document the journey. The walks lasted 30 to 40 minutes and participants came back together afterwards to prepare a poster telling the story of their journey, which they then presented to the room. The intention of this was to get participants to reflect on their experiences of the reality of the building as a grounding for the second half of the workshop. This consisted of a speculative design task involving 3 researcher-developed speculative technologies, or diegetic artifacts, following Dunn and Raby's definition of diegetic artifacts in their 2013 book, Speculative Everything. These artifacts were purely presentations of the technology idea, rather than a deeper narrative supporting this tech's position in the social fabric of the building, as you might expect with a more fleshed-out design fiction. The designs themselves were developed through a series of guiding interviews with building management staff. The artifacts are described in more detail in the paper, and further can be found as supplementary material in the ACM digital library. Our findings were developed out of the themes produced through the thematic analysis process. These were clustered into 2 sections, relating to participants' situated experiences of HBI and the socio-organisational considerations for HBI which emerged as a result. In this talk, I'll focus on 2 of them. These are how opaque space rules lead to unclear affordances, and the Janus face of smart building data, powerful resource or resource for power. Participants in our study formed mental models about the function of spaces, what they were for, and of their permission to use or occupy them. These mental models of permission in turn informed use of the building, and during the walks we observed sense-making practices around determining them. One novel HBI we observed was the use of the smart card reader as a proxy for determining permission. This quote captures this, so the students were saying, "Are we allowed in? Has anyone got a student card?" The card reader then beeps. "That's a no." Once again it beeped, sounding good, and didn't let us in. So there's a basic assumption here that if the smart card technology gave them access to a space, then they are allowed to use it. In another example, the bike store affords access to postgraduate students and staff, but not to undergraduates. This difference in social role has conferred a different level of permission for a resource, as in this quote. "I don't think the undergrads don't have access. They're too oppressed. No powers, man." But on the other hand, smart card access turned out not to correlate with the perceived social permissions of spaces within the building, which created confusion. So this student says, "All these doors give you the wrong impression, that you're not allowed." Perceived affordances are therefore impacted by understandings of space and how these are communicated by the design of the building. We found that spatial affordances are both defined and perceived according to the social hierarchy of the organisation. For example, a smart card locked door might afford access to research staff but not to undergraduate students. This creates confusion when the building interaction doesn't match up with the social perception, which leads to underutilisation of building resources. Building interaction design which acknowledges student occupants' mental models may be a starting point towards more satisfied and included occupants and fostering community and space ownership. So next, smart buildings, as exemplified by the building in this study, have this ability to collect, analyse and act on massive amounts of data. The diegetic artifacts in the speculative design exercise, and this one in particular, probed students' thoughts around novel forms of interaction with this data, in contrast to the current smart building black box approach where that data is hidden and opaque. This is Spacebot. It's a Twitter bot which connects a building user to the building's BMS system via a conversational agent. The idea was to get at issues around interacting more directly with smart building data. While students showed an interest in access to the building's data, I really do like the idea of being able to interact with the building that's apparently taking all of our data as well. They considered the availability of this data to be Janus-faced or two-faced. On the one hand, they ideated about how the university might be able to enable 24-hour access to the building through its use, and how it might enable better selection of workspaces. On the other hand, the possibility of abuse was thought to be high, and there was a concern that the shared nature of the building meant that the effects of such abuse could be felt by more occupants. This student thought that it's pretty dodgy, I think. I'd say just have an API and then there's traceability. As students of an engineering discipline, our participants did seem to be keenly aware of the potential uses and misuses of data collected by the building, and demonstrated an ability to suggest mitigations. Through transparency and the involvement of occupants in conversations around how their data is used, smart building data could be used in ways which include rather than exclude building occupants. Future smart building HBI might leverage this dialogue as a powerful resource for inclusion. So our findings related to how smart building occupants conceptualised and understood their space, and how we might begin to design agency into everyday smart building experiences. The discussion positions these findings around recommendations for future HBI design. Specifically, we cover how technology might grant facilities managers insights into the student experience, new digital ways for occupants to play a role in evaluating their building, and we link these to HCI in generating design implications for future HBI and facilities management technologies. Our discussion points have relevance for HCI and HBI practitioners designing smart built environments, but also for facilities managers and management staff who may be best placed to implement these in smart buildings in future. Of these discussion points, I'm going to focus on just 3. These are communicating agency to building end users, HBI's role in supporting or challenging the status quo, and we present a technologically mediated approach to engaging building users, which we tentatively term participatory auditing. So firstly, communicating agency. Addressing the finding on Affordances I mentioned, we discuss how agency in the building should be communicated to building end users. Helwig's 2015 paper on perceived control highlights issues with learned helplessness in scenarios with low levels of personal agency. People stop trying to exercise control over their surroundings if their activities have no effect on the situation. This has largely already happened in non-domestic office buildings owing to the outsourcing of facilities management and therefore comfort management to specialist teams. See Golden and Spence 2015. In the university context, occupants, especially students, have very little direct agency in the space. So in this discussion, we recommend that designing for perception of control might be a starting point for improving occupant agency. To begin to address this, we suggest that smart building interactions might include an immediate and liminal response to communicate to occupants that their action was effective. With comfort systems, this interaction is easily understood as we can receive feedback from temperature displays. Yet, in a smart building where automation regulates or attempts to regulate occupants' comfort, agency to make such changes has been removed or abstracted away. This follows the design pattern set by existing facilities management practices, where responsibility for energy management is centralised with the facilities manager. Ownership of smart building data is assumed by the existing management structure. There's an opportunity here for using data more transparently to involve occupants in conversations about the building. Such a two-way negotiation can offer a greater perception of control and act as a starting point for fostering both occupant agency and responsibility. This leads on to the second discussion point I want to talk about. While buildings management often seeks ways of managing that maintain the status quo, we consider this might change in future. There's already smart work in the smart home research area, highlighting the ways in which the concept of smartness should support occupants. For example, Sarah Menniken et al.'s 2014 paper recommends that in future smart homes will collaborate with their inhabitants instead of only being controlled by them. This recommendation can and should also be taken up in the non-domestic smart building space. The Polaroid on the slide is of a door which students found was propped open because the air conditioning in the room had failed. It's an example of an adaptive action taken by occupants when the design of smart systems had not produced a desired result. We need to shift the rhetoric of smartness away from automation back towards the human, so that smart buildings can be smart for occupants too. That said, perhaps a change in the culture of both managing and occupying buildings needs to occur before more radically reconfigurable smart buildings can become a reality. Neoliberal management structures and processes create a culture that results in occupant disengagement. Why take responsibility for a space if you're just the customer of the service it provides? There's an open question for us as HBI designers and practitioners. Should HBI be designing to support service-oriented buildings management, or should it be disrupting the space? In order to decentralise and distribute responsibility to building occupants as stakeholders, it could be that we as HCI practitioners need to take a stronger stance against doing research and building systems which support this facilities management as a service status quo. So if automation does not equate to smartness, how else might we approach the problem? We conclude the paper with recommendations towards a participatory auditing approach, which calls for buildings to be continually evaluated and reconfigured over their lifetimes in a way that begins with occupant needs. Auditing of non-domestic buildings is a common practice which allows facilities managers to quantify the sustainability and performance of the buildings they manage. See Mitchell, Finnigan et al. 2017. Participatory auditing proposes that occupants are involved more closely in this management process. In order to create an organisational culture through which this might be accomplished, we suggest 4 central tenets for participatory auditing of smart buildings, produced from the findings of this paper. HCI and HBI have a role in designing the interactions which accomplish these. These are to shift entrenched social roles, which lead to occupants feeling reduced agency and consequently responsibility, to promote collaboration between occupants and facilities managers, and to enable on-the-fly reconfiguration of building spaces, and to disseminate information as part of collaborative discussions. This concludes this talk. Thank you so much for listening, and please feel free to download the full paper if you found this research interesting.